One of the reasons we need to protect freedom of association, why we need to protect associations, is because associations are they're the incubators of truth and truth-seeking. They're the incubators of individuals who will be able to contribute to the public good. Also, associations are mediators between the state and individuals. It's within associations, whether they're educational, cultural, religious, social, familial. These associations are means in which individuals can solve their own problems at a local level. They can figure out their own disputes. They can assist each other, help each other, build each other up, just provide social cohesion. They could support each other emotionally, physically, financially, relationally, all of these kinds of things. And these associations, for hundreds of years, philosophers, legal scholars, politicians and so on, they've recognized that value of that association. But the trend in our culture, the trend in our law is an individualistic one. And so the importance of these associations as mediating institutions between the state and the individual, they're diminishing in authority and they're diminishing in their special protection. And so what we're left with is a whole lot of individuals wandering around on their own without any network that's recognized as having an authority and recognized as having a particular significance worth protecting. And we're just left with the one massive institution known as the state and all kinds of these little siloed individuals. Over the last 30, 40 years of the Charter, one aspect of freedom of association has been completely protected. In fact, they've expanded the right as it relates to labor unions only. So in the work employment context, tons of protection, tons of dialogue by the Supreme Court. But what about all of those other associations? What about fraternal groups, fraternities and sororities? What about charities and educational institutions? What about social groups and cultural groups and religious groups? What about them? And when we look at all of the case law that's developed under freedom of association, they just don't get any mention at all. Religious organizations, for example, are usually dealt with under Section 2A, freedom of religion, and we're seeing concerning trends there. And the associative dimension, that dimension about people coming together for a particular purpose, that dimension's completely missing. It's not protected in the language of our Supreme Court or in other courts or tribunals.
Rights and conceptions of freedoms are constantly changing in various ways. The whole social media universe and its effect on communication, on what association means when you can associate through internet networks as distinct from associating in a meeting. All of these things require political people to say, how does the Charter, how do these rights and freedoms, how does our Constitution fit to these circumstances as distinct from those that existed in 1867 or even 1980 when the current Charter was put together?
As we look down the road, as we look ahead a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, I think that there's cultural trends happening, and culture and law are always dialoguing. There's cultural trends happening where I think people are hungry for meaning, for purpose. And that's really difficult to figure out all on your own. The place to figure that out is not by going to the state and not necessarily looking internally. It's by having relationship with other people who are there walking alongside you for the long term. And so I see great value, looking again down the road, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, great value in trying to make sure that we preserve the ability of judges to be able to look at these associations and see their value, because right now that's not being seen. And if we can get them to understand the value of those associations, we're going to make sure that not only do these groups exist, but they're actually valued by the highest powers in the country, so that individuals, as they're struggling through teenage years and through work employment, entering the workforce years in their 20s, or developing a family in their 30s, or approaching retirement in their 50s or 60s, that they have a network there that's responsible, that's able to respond in meaningful and big ways without necessarily having the big brother of the state interfering in how exactly they do that.
In our system, it's important to keep in mind the fundamental values that are affirmed by the Charter, because if you pass laws that violate those, sooner or later they'll be overturned by the court. So being conscious of what is in the Charter, what the guaranteed rights are, even when you're dealing with ordinary legislation, is extremely important.
A lot of these freedoms have been left behind. They haven't really been fully articulated, and yet they're so essential to understanding our freedoms because they do interact. We can have a conscience, but if we're not permitted to express that conscience, or perhaps the conscientious conviction arises from a religious belief, we need to be able to protect each of those and not compartmentalize them and reject one in favor of another. They all work together, and they all need to be understood individually and collectively so that we have the full measure of protection that the Charter is intended to provide.
We've created this video series for you, and we hope that through this series, you'll learn a little bit more about the guarantees that you enjoy in Canada.